Thank you for volunteering to serve as a proposal reviewer. You are all about to undertake the review of hundreds of proposals that have been submitted for this year's conference. The POD Network and the conference team thanks you and are deeply grateful that you are joining us on the journey to make this year's conference a huge success. This conference's proposal review process uses anonymous peer reviews in which the authors' identities are masked from the reviewers and the reviewers' identities are masked from the authors. Generally, an anonymous review is understood to reduce prestige-based bias, yet evidence for the effectiveness in reducing other kinds of bias is limited and mixed. This training and its reflection activities have been developed to align with best practices for conferences. It is also one way that the POD Network aims to address systemic bias and structural racism at the organizational level. We hope that this training will help prepare you for your respective roles as proposal reviewers. This training is intended to help ensure that proposals are consistently scored and that feedback to proposal authors is transparent and constructive. In this training, reviewers will identify bias, microaggressions, and negative and/or dismissive comments, and recognize and provide constructive feedback that are grounded in the review criteria and the POD Network values. You will also have an opportunity to practice these skills through the exploration of reviewer feedback and the examination of sample proposal reviews. You may also choose to complete the supplemental worksheets and a quiz associated with this training. As you may know, the POD Network exists to provide professional development in a community of practice for scholars and practitioners of educational development, and to serve as a leading voice on matters related to teaching and learning in higher education. The image on the screen are three interconnected circles that depict the POD Network's values and commitments. Specifically, the POD Network strives to be collaborative and collegial. The value of equity discusses how the POD Network strives to be transparent and inclusive with ongoing efforts to promote equitable access and involvement, eliminate systemic inequities that result from biases, and supporting members in advancing social justice. Finally, the third circle represents evidence. The POD Network strives to ground practices and decisions in evidence, adapt and reuse proven methods, and innovate to improve upon prior work. Diverse forms of evidence, a variety of inquiry methods and theories are recognized as valuable and essential. Thus, the values of collaboration, equity, and evidence should undergird your thinking and approach as you rate each proposal. As a reviewer, you will be prompted to rate the proposal across 7 themes. For example, does the proposal support and advance POD's mission and values of collaboration, equity, and evidence? Next, how does the session relate to the conference theme? We expect reviewers to attune to how the authors have embedded the conference theme into their session and in their outlines, and hopefully the theme extends beyond a snazzy title. Another area that you will rate is how the session is likely to advance or advocate equity and inclusion. In other words, how does the session address implementing inclusive practices, foster critical engagement, and/or encourage equitable and inclusive campuses? Another theme for review is evidence. You will be rating how the concepts and materials presented in the proposal explicitly connect to teaching, learning, or practice. Evidence can be drawn from qualitative and quantitative methods, interdisciplinary and methodological approaches, reflections and experiences, participatory practices, community knowledge, indigenous and/or other ways of knowing. In terms of applicability and transferability, we want to know if the idea, topic, practice, and so forth is relevant to the field of educational and/or organizational development, and whether the session is likely to be applicable and/or transferable to other institutions and programs. Similarly, for the theme of innovation and insightfulness, does the session offer fresh information and/or describe innovative or creative practices? Finally, are the session activities, meaning those that are guiding the questions and interactions, are they aligned with the session outcomes, and does the session support the participants' full engagement? Rating a proposal can be a difficult process, and for some a process that facilitates self-consciousness, and that's okay. The purpose of breaking down this rubric is not to make the process intimidating or anxiety-provoking. Rather, the conference team hopes that this rubric provides a clear direction of how to accurately assess and rate the proposal. Let's now break down how to use the rating scale. You will use a rating scale of 1 to 4. Specifically, 4 is excellent, meaning there are no concerns or questions. 3 is good. This implies that there are minor concerns or questions, however, they will not be an impediment. 2 is fair, meaning that you have concerns or questions about the item that should be addressed if the proposal is accepted for the conference. And 1, which represents poor, namely that there are significant concerns or questions about the item which must be addressed if the proposal is accepted for the conference. Should you choose to use a rating of not applicable, it will not get factored into or diminish a proposal's final score. Upon conclusion of your review, you will be prompted to share your final recommendations, whether you recommend that the proposal be accepted, accepted with reservation, or rejected. Now this can be quite tricky because the tendency is to accept all proposals as high. So let's see if we can provide some further insight on what will help the session coordinators and the conference team make a more informed decision based on your review. If the batch of proposals you are assigned are of high quality, it should be reflected in how you have scored the proposals. An accept means that the proposal has an average score of 3 or higher. For example, if your ratings are mostly 4s, your comments to the authors should illustrate that the proposal is excellent and why you believe so. Comments should not be copied and pasted into the non-public comments to the conference team. This is not particularly helpful. Rather, use the non-public review as an opportunity to distinguish between an average proposal with scores of mostly 3 and those that are truly exceptional. Now let's discuss what you should do if you have reservations about a proposal. Reservations should be addressed in your comments to the authors and must also show up in your ratings. For example, if the authors have not addressed the implications of their work, such as the applicability and transferability of themes, should be rated with a 2 or 1. If a proposal receives consistent 1s and 2s, or all 2s, it should be earmarked in the rejection category, and quite importantly, be articulated clearly in the comments to the authors as well as to the conference committee. Finally, it is noteworthy to share that the conference team's vision is to facilitate a consistent review process. As such, an audit is conducted at the conclusion of the review process, whereby reviewer comments are flagged if they are problematic, meaning there are negative, dismissive, or microaggressions, and the audit also identifies if the reviewer's scores seem inconsistent with the comments they have made on the proposal. In cases where problematic or inconsistent reviews have been noted, a member of the conference team may reach out to the reviewer with an opportunity to revise the comment or rating. The conference team is available to provide guidance on how to reword the review constructively. Proposal authors put time, energy, and effort into expressing their work. When authors submit their proposals, there is a degree of uncertainty of whether the proposal will be accepted. This may be grounds for emotional exposure and bring up fears of rejection. For some authors, submitting a proposal can be a vulnerable act, and receiving feedback may lead to anxiety and stress. It is important for you to remember that vulnerability takes courage. Proposal authors are showing up, making their work seen, even if it was tough to do so, while being terrified about what reviewers might see or think. As a reviewer, your sensitivity to the author's experience goes a long way, and likely you've been on the other side as the author yourself. Using tact and being mindful of your tone are paramount. Be kind, have compassion, and remember that the goal of providing feedback is to strengthen and improve the author's work. By doing so, you are helping to build a stronger pod community where everyone can flourish and the field of educational development can move forward. Later in this training, we will take a deeper dive on how to provide constructive feedback. The normative stance in the global north is often white, middle-class, able-bodied, cisgender, and heteronormative. The legacy of colonization and oppressive histories have brought these notions of the norm into the global south, privileging the knowledge, experiences, dispositions, and feelings of these groups and classifications. This normative stance and the concepts of whiteness often shape our biases and may show up in terms of aggression or insulting others. While it is beyond the scope of this training to unpack concepts of coloniality and whiteness, being aware of your biases and how they might influence the language you use is a critical first step towards providing constructive feedback. Most people have good intentions and do not want to cause harm when providing feedback. So as to ensure that we are all on the same page on how to provide an appropriate review, this next section of the training will briefly highlight some cursory definitions about biases and microaggressions. You will then have an opportunity to practice identifying problematic language in sample reviews so that you can be more self-aware with your feedback. As you may know, biases is a disproportionate weight in favor or against an idea or thing. They are closed-minded, prejudicial, and unfair. Biases can be innate or learned. People may develop biases for or against an individual, group, and/or belief. We will discuss unconscious bias in more detail shortly. Microaggressions, which can be broken down into several types such as micro-insults, micro-assaults, or micro-invalidations, are commonplace daily verbal, nonverbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities that communicate hostile, derogatory, or insulting messages to the target person or group. They can be intentional or unintentional. Unintentional microaggressions are rooted in the unconscious or implicit bias. Microaggressions are often invisible. These definitions are based on the foundational work of Gerald Wing Sue and more recently, Sue and Spanierman's publication on microaggressions in everyday life. Within the POD community and the educational development space writ large, authors such as Drs. Chang, Ganote, and Souza have also championed the dialogue on microaggressions and micro-resistances. Unconscious biases are social stereotypes about certain groups of people that individuals form outside their own conscious awareness. Everyone holds unconscious beliefs about various social and identity groups, and these biases stem from one's tendency to organize social worlds by categorizing. There are several common rater errors that may perpetuate unconscious biases. This includes the halo effect, which is the tendency to make inappropriate generalizations about the author's content or intent. Another common rater area is leniency, which is the tendency to evaluate all proposals as outstanding and to give inflated ratings rather than true assessments of the proposal. Central tendency, on the other hand, is the tendency to evaluate every proposal as average, while strictness rater error is the tendency to rate all proposals at the low end of the scale by being overly critical. Two other common errors that reviewers may make is the first impression error or the similar to me effect error. The first is the tendency to make an initial favorable or unfavorable judgment about the proposal and then ignore subsequent information that does not support this impression. The similar to me effect is the tendency to more favorably judge proposals perceived as similar to yourself and your scholarly work. To minimize these errors, you need to ask yourself, am I basing my rating on the content in the proposal, or am I making judgments based on my own perceptions and generalizations about the author's work? Questioning whether you are rating the author's proposals solely on their own merit or comparing them to other proposals will also help to reduce reviewer biases. Rating a proposal is not a place for imposing your personal opinions. Focus on the content that has been provided, not what you wish you had included if you were the author. Gender-based bias and ableism is particularly problematic. Being attuned to the author's use of language may be particularly helpful. Have they used patriarchal, masculine-associated, cisgendered, or ableist words or constructs? And if they have, how can you draw attention to this in a constructive way? Later in the training, we will discuss how to write constructive feedback. How people experience the world is valid, even if those experiences are outside the reviewer's worldview. One of the ways we know this is because there are so many ways to understand and practice inclusive teaching. Your role as a reviewer is to recognize and value that there is a spectrum of ways of knowing, pedagogies, methodologies, and positionalities. You will now have an opportunity to practice identifying bias and racial microaggressions through the exploration of sample reviewer feedback. We ask that you take a few minutes to review the 5 statements that will appear on your screen shortly. Then, please select at least 2 of these statements and reflect on how they are problematic and why. The statements are as follows. 1. Your proposal is about Black, Indigenous, and people of color, yet you seem to draw from literature that focuses primarily on the experiences of Black students. Draw from more inclusive sources and determine your target audience. Statement 2. Historically marginalized educational developers' experiences in TLCs are an important topic. I'm excited to attend your session. We have so much to learn from the presenters, especially from recommendations. Statement 3. Could be better developed. Please provide evidence of how these specific marginalized groups relate to the work of educational developers. You might want to take an intersectionality approach. It would strengthen the session. Statement 4. It would be worthwhile for pod members if this session on Faculty of Color experiences could also address allyship. And Statement 5. While the experiences of Indigenous students are timely and a unique topic, I am not sure it's transferable to all campuses. After you have completed this activity, I will attempt to briefly unpack these statements so that you can carry your learnings forward as you conduct your reviews. At this time, you should press pause on the video and write down your reflections. When you are ready, please press play to continue the training. Some of the central themes in these statements is the notion that the work of equity and inclusion should be executed by people of color or diverse others, and that beneficiaries of such work are often good-willed white allies who want to implement recommendations offered by people of color, and that white people and their experiences are the norm or basis of expertise and credibility. Let's deconstruct this a bit further. Using phrases such as, it would be worthwhile, such as in Statement 4, or more inclusive sources, such as in Statement 1, are likely to be poorly received as offensive, undermining, or demeaning. In other words, the experiences and narratives of faculty of color is not a worthwhile topic of its own merit unless allyship is addressed. Another theme in these statements is an assumption about how intersectionality does or does not operate in marginalized groups or among ignored people. Statement 3 seems to also imply a misreading of intersectionality. It is important to remember that authors have limited word count restrictions in which to communicate their ideas. Thus, requesting that proposal authors provide evidence is not particularly useful and may in fact be harmful to the recipients. Statement 5 is also particularly problematic because it implies that the experiences of a marginalized group, in this case Indigenous students, is not of concern to all campuses. This statement others Indigenous students and demonstrates the reviewer's potential ignorance of the forced removal of Indigenous peoples from their land, upon which most North American universities and colleges are built. People of color, Black, Indigenous people of color, Asian people, Latinx, and other groups are often lumped together and used as a foil to what is normal, i.e. white. If a proposer chooses to focus on one minoritized or marginalized group, this is just as valid as a more universalized cultural approach, which often has so many exceptions as to render it useless. In fact, a focused look at a particular experience may offer more opportunities for everyone's learning. Statement 2 is also highly problematic. The use of the word we reinforces the sense that the proposers are on the outside of the organization and they need to teach white colleagues who are on the inside. Let's say that the proposal authors are not part of a minoritized group or among historically ignored people. The use of we is still exclusionary because it is likely to be interpreted as an inside group. Maybe the statement could be reframed as, historically marginalized educational developers' experiences in TLCs are an important topic. I'm excited to attend your session. It would benefit everyone in the pod network community. We hope you found that helpful. It is certainly not an exhaustive list of the themes prevalent in these comments, nor does it debunk every aspect of what is problematic. but it is a start into unearthing systemic issues that sometimes creep into reviews, and we just want you to be aware and conscious of how it happens. The next section of this training will feature how to provide constructive feedback. Much of these helpful tips are based on the findings of Lubinsky's work, which were based on the analyses of the American Educational Research Association, ARA, conference context on how reviewing conference proposals differs from that of journal articles. On the screen there are two text boxes. This is to illustrate that you will be requested to provide two types of feedback. Feedback to the proposal authors, which will be shared with them, and feedback to the program chairs and session coordinators, which will only be shared with the conference committee. Reviewers should assume the author's claims have merit. As a reminder, the goal of a review is to not show how much you know. It's to look for ways to strengthen and improve the author's work by providing clear and insightful reviews. What this typically means is a couple of thoughtful sentences to the author and a few sentences to the program chair and session coordinators. Comments can be extremely heartening or disheartening. It is important to note that unconstructive feedback may further alienate marginalized or ignored people. Even reviewers who recommend rejecting a proposal can provide helpful encouragement to the author. The reviewers who are most helpful to authors do 5 specific things. First, good conference proposal reviewers focus on the most important substantive issues when writing comments to the authors. Second, the most constructive reviews balance critique with positive comments. Third, if you find yourself getting passionate while reviewing, you may need to pause and reread your reviews. Reviewers should not let their own research agenda or pet peeves serve as their dominant lens. In a similar vein, reviewers should not automatically dismiss proposals for lack of perceived fit with the conference theme. A review that is clear and carefully constructed is not only helpful to the author, but also enhances the author's confidence that the review process was carefully executed by knowledgeable reviewers. Therefore, it is critical that you proofread your review before you click submit. You may be tempted to assign a high rating to each category by default, with a recommendation of acceptance unless you have very grave concerns. Although this may seem encouraging to authors, it does not help the authors or the program chairs understand the proposal's strengths and weaknesses. Additionally, overuse of high ratings makes it difficult for session coordinators to efficiently rule out weaker proposals and focus on those that merit further consideration. Reviewers should strive to vary their ratings both within and across proposals to indicate where a proposal is strongest, what aspects could be improved, and which proposals should and should not be included in the conference program. Let's now shift our focus on how to provide thoughtful feedback for the program chairs and session coordinators. It is not helpful to say, "See author's notes," or write lengthy comments that repeat the comments that have already been made to the author, as it only adds to the chairs and coordinators' reading load. Rather, your feedback should be brief, a summarization of the study's focus and contributions, as well as a brief explanation of why you recommend acceptances or rejection of the proposal. Also, the comments to the program chairs can be quite frank and straightforward. Secondly, comments should be consistent with the content of the overall review. For example, a reviewer should not tell the author, "This is an interesting proposal," but then tell the chairs, "This work has already been done." Third, reviewers should feel free to make specific suggestions about the presentation format. Finally, reviewers can alert the chairs and coordinators to any other pertinent issues. Now that you are more familiar with how to provide constructive feedback, let's take a moment to put it into action. In this next activity, you will be asked to identify the negative and/or dismissive comments in several reviewer statements. Then, we ask that you select at least 2 of these statements and rewrite them constructively. It may be helpful to imagine that you are in a conversation with the proposal authors themselves. What would you say? How would you encourage them? Sometimes it's much more difficult to share critique in person, but that's exactly what you should be thinking about as you rewrite these statements. It's not about hiding behind an anonymous comment. It's about having a growth orientation to your feedback and a mindset of development, openness, and humility. So figure out how to say things in a way that motivates and inspires the authors to bring out their best work, and don't forget to clearly communicate how their work connects to the POD Network's values of collaboration, equity, and evidence. I will now read the statements that you are being asked to reflect on. Statement 1. This is useful, but the model techniques are not particularly novel and are already in many facilitators' toolboxes. Statement 2. This is such an important topic, I'd hate to see it excluded, but if it's done poorly, it's potentially damaging. Statement 3. The approach in practice may be a viable one for our times, but you may wish to offer several richer references. Only 2 works are cited, and both are dated despite their relevance. Statement 4. Polling, brainstorming, and think, pair, share can be pretty shallow activities for a lot of very educated and experienced people, so I encourage presenters to think more carefully about what exactly they hope participants will walk away with and identify more challenging activities for the session. Statement 5. I think that the instrument in the session could be valuable. I have reservations about the rigor of content and the thoughtfulness behind the plan for delivery. You should now press pause on the video to complete this brief activity. After you have completed your reflection, please press play to continue with the training. There are several trigger words in these statements, such as not particularly novel, offer richer references, and if it's done poorly, all of which are condescending and likely to deflate the recipients. Additionally, personal judgments have no place in reviewer feedback, such as suggesting that the content lacks rigor, the plan for delivery is not thoughtful, or that particular methodologies are shallow for educated people. The latter further implies that the proposal authors are inexperienced and not highly educated, given that they have opted to use polling, brainstorming, or think, pair, share. In the case of Statement 3, it is never appropriate to put the authors down for dated work. There are always ways to communicate that current scholarship has the potential to strengthen the proposal. Statement 2 is particularly harmful because the reviewers make grand assumptions that the content will be poorly presented and bases their recommendation on this false pretense. The irony of this reviewer's feedback is that the comment itself is damaging. It is poorly thought through and insensitive. In Statement 1, we need to ask ourselves, whose toolbox matters? Perhaps individuals newer to the field of educational development could benefit from the model techniques proposed by the authors. And as we grow and have more experiences, we hear things differently, so there's always something to add to your toolbox, even if the techniques are well known to you because we're listening to it differently than we did before. There are so many ways to deconstruct these comments. Maybe you found even more ways than mentioned here. This concludes the formal portion of the reviewer training. We wanted to take a moment to thank you for being an integral part of the annual conference's success. We couldn't do it without your hard work, commitment, and dedication to the POD network. So thank you for all that you do and for your time and energy participating in this training. This training was developed and audio narrated by myself, Pamela Roy, as the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Consultant to the POD Conference Committee, and in consultation with the 2021 and 2022 POD Conference teams and the 2021 Ad Hoc Committee for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. These members include, in alphabetical order, Lynn Eaton, Kristen English, Teresa Focarel, Christopher Grabau, Claudio Corneo Hapel, Chad Hershock, Hogue Holmgren, Hyung Kim, Antonia Levy, Tammy McCoy, Jose Munoz, Jared Quinn, Cheryl Richardson, Carol Sabino Sullivan, and Herman Fargas Ramos.